we're not a lot of people, so you might want to come closer because we want to use the speaker. So you will definitely hear me.
You should hear me as well. All right. Shouldn't be a problem.
All right.
But you're welcome to come close. We don't bite often.
Often. Yeah.
Always often.
I don't know. Always be a surprise. So thank you for coming. Welcome to another JFrog meetup. And today we're hosting a Met with CircleCI. Yeah. Thank you for coming and joining us. And we're going to speak about CircleCI and how it is different from other CI servers, I would say, right? And we'll show you a demo on how CircleCI integrates with JFrog Artifactory, namely. This webinar is, this meetup is recorded and actually streamed live. So you will be able to get the recording like right after. And with that.
Yeah, let's get started. So I don't often do these, so I'm very happy to have a chance to do this. I'm head of product. So usually we have a technical product manager and SE come in. So I'm excited to do this. And we were actually working on it just up until the last few minutes, which was fun. So it sort of demonstrates that it's very dynamic and it's possible to move through quickly. I'm happy to also see another CircleCI shirt in the crowd. Awesome. Awesome.
Oh, good.
So, well, you probably know this already, but for others, one of the reasons we really were hoping to talk today was to spread the word about some differences in CircleCI, especially with the container movement, which is now full-fledged and just running at full steam, and the way in which we think about builds and we think about workflows, and the fact that it's a much more dynamic environment. It's a lot easier to manage from a operations standpoint as a DevOps manager, and then also as a developer to consume. So can I just get a sense of like how many folks here consider themselves on the developer side and how many on the DevOps side? Or is everyone blurred? Any sense? Hand raised. Pure developer versus DevOps.
Ops.
Okay.
Ops. Yeah, most of the.
All right, so it's a pretty healthy split. So the reason I ask is we think of the world in three different personas. We think of the developer, we think of the operator, and we think of the manager. And across those personas, the value proposition for CircleCI is a little bit different. In the case of the operator, what we're trying to do is improve the ratio of how many developers you can support so that you can have, instead of 1 to 5, it's 1 to 20, 1 to 30. So what we're trying to do is provide an environment, a cloud-based environment where you can easily create and spin up new containers, new environments, run builds, and have it all directly from a configuration file. So really the power, I'll just jump in here really quickly. Some of the power of CircleCI is the fact that in order to create a job, to create a run or create a workflow, you just go to your config file in whatever VCS you're using, and you just modify the config file, and you automatically get another environment, 2 environments, 4 environments. And if you have a particular job that you need to split across multiple containers, you just identify the parallelism that you want, and we'll automatically split it up for you. And so this is a very different way of thinking than going installing a Jenkins box and installing a Jenkins worker and then attaching the two. And then if you have to upgrade Mongo, God forbid, now you got to go back to your Jenkins box, upgrade the environment in the Jenkins box. For us, you just switch the container you want to use. So as an example, and this is part of what we're going to talk about today, but as an example in here, you just identify the Docker image you want to use for that particular job. We go grab it and you're off and running in that container. So if you want to change Mongo version, just go find or make a container with the version of Mongo you want, reference it, you're off and running. So that's a big, there are many, many other things that are wonderful about CircleCI, but that's really kind of the focus of what we were going to demo today, was this relationship we can have between the artifact repository and running inside a container and then sort of doing both simultaneously. So in this particular case, instead of going to Docker Hub, we're reaching out directly to Artifactory. That's bin tray. Yep. Reaching out to bin tray to grab. This is actually the base image. So this overall cycle here goes through. We used a image that we created that was a combination of Node and some of the JFrog CLI. We then went through. I grabbed a project off of an MIT licensed React project just for fun. It's a calculator. I don't think we'll ever actually look at it, but that's what I grabbed. It's a Node project. I come in, I identify some keys so that I can pull the cache faster, right? So this is going to allow me to build up an environment, cache it, and then later pull it back so that we can make the build run faster on the next run, on run 2, run 3, run 4. Then we go through, we confirm that JFrog is happy, that we can connect. We log in. We then pull our NPM dependencies, and this is interesting. So this is actually the first time I've done this. Normally, I would have just used NPM directly because that's what my container would have had in it. But here, Baruch showed me how to use JFrog to actually get my NPM dependencies directly from Artifactory. And
not only you get them directly from Artifactory, that you can just use by specifying different NPM registry. The benefit of using JFrog CLI to retrieve your NPM dependencies is that they are getting recorded in the build info. And we're going to show a little bit of that. When you do JFrog NPM install instead of your normal NPM install, you get the metadata recorded.
Can I ask a question? So if I were an enterprise install running the server product, so CircleCI has a server product as well as a cloud resource. If I'm running in a server product, can I then interact with the same capability without going out to the World Wide Web in a closed environment?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are now showing how 3 SaaS projects work together, right? So we have Bintray, from which we actually retrieve the Docker image that we run in the container we create from. And we have Artifactory Cloud that we here interact with, and that's because we run on a cloud and locality matters, and we want the artifact repository be where your CI server is. Since we are showing the SaaS version of CircleCI, we pick the SaaS version of Artifactory.
So I was assuming that was going to be the answer.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons I asked it though is we have enterprise customers that ask us if they can run CircleCI within their closed environment and then still support a global set of developers. And this actually would solve that, because one of the requests is I want to be able to interact with our local artifact repository and not have to reach out to the open web. I don't want to open up ports on the machines. I don't want to open up ports on the containers. So I sort of assumed that would be the case, but that's, I think, a really powerful thing. So you can choose how open or closed the overall environment is and yet still get the benefits whether you're up in SaaS or not.
Right. And I want to, before we continue with that, what got me really excited is the part of the custom Docker image. So I suppose, first of all, the idea of this containerization of your build process is just, I don't need to describe what dependencies I want, what environment I want. I don't need to install plugins. I just build a Docker image that kind of encapsulates everything I need on my build agent, and then you just run it. I think that's very, very helpful and very good.
I think over the last 15 minutes, we did it 4 or 5 times.
Yeah, so we change the environments all the time. And I bet you have a library of pre-configured images.
We do. We have several hundred just pre-made containers, different images that you can use in CircleCI. And then also you can just use anything from Docker Hub. So you don't actually have, so as it's demonstrated here, so long as you can connect with the URI and you have permission to log in, you can pull whatever container you want to run it.
And we actually made a custom container. Can you show the Docker file? Let's see the Docker file that we actually made just like for this demo.
Give me a moment to see where I am here. Yep.
Maybe a little bit larger.
Yeah, let's see if I can just, here, hold on.
Right, so you can see here
a little bit.
Yeah, that we are using one of those hundreds of prepared CircleCI run images, and then we extend from it. And what we did here, we actually took this node image that we need for our NPM build and added the installation of JFrog CLI to it.
And this also underscores another point, which is in terms of how CircleCI thinks about the world, we really just think about it in terms of things you can do on the command line. So if you can do it on a command line, then we can enable it here. And that's why creating containers such as this is so useful. Do you have a question?
Two questions for you. The line 31, when you call JFrog RT npm install.
Yeah.
What other options other than npm install can you do? Like new get, can you do?
Yeah. So we're going to.
As we get further down, you're going to start to see we use many others.
Yeah. So we're going to speak about it in a minute, but I kind of stuck at this thing of the image that we run because I think it's very, very useful. So here we created a custom image and we actually run it. Right. So this is cool.
My second question is, where does it get the credentials on line 31?
Oh, okay.
All right. So I can show you.
And then, of course, we put this image on Bintray, but again, that's because this is a cloud environment. If when we run in an on-prem environment, instead of using Bintray, we can use Artifactory, which will be installed on-prem with a Docker registry that will contain. It will be probably a special repository that will be called like my run images or whatever, or my CI images, and they will include the CI configurations. And what it actually does, that's the only way you can guarantee a repeatable build.
That's right.
Because when you have all those checkboxes and plugins and configuration of those plugins, they get out of hand really, really quickly. And now if you want to try to rebuild the same build you did half a year ago, chances that you will get the same exact versions of all the of all the pieces that you had in your build are very, very low. But here, as long as you keep this image around that you used to build, you take this image, you take the configuration from GitHub, you take the sources from GitHub, and everything works repeatedly.
Identically. And then in terms of the login here, you're asking about where do the credentials come from? So what we're doing within CircleCI, we have a number of different levels for providing environment variables into the build. You'll notice that we don't flatten it out. So we don't show what your credentials were or show what your information is, but internally we do understand. So we have really two concepts. One is environment variables, and the other one we actually call context. And a context is something that can be created at the org level or something we call the account level. And it can be shared across projects if you so desire. And in about a month, we'll be releasing a security edition where you can identify the GitHub team that you want to allow access to the context. So that's very useful if you have keys that are leading to a production deploy or keys that are connecting to your artifact repository and you want to protect some portion of it. You can associate a GitHub team, or if you're running enterprise and using LDAP, you can identify an Active Directory group and then say this context, these keys can only be used by these people. So that's a very useful concept. But in terms of the config, you just reference them like they're environment variables. You don't need to do anything fancy or special. It's very easy to use from that standpoint.
And the environment variables, I assume, can be encrypted.
Yes. Well, actually,
when we're talking about passwords.
Yeah, so everything's encrypted. We actually use Vault, encrypt everything, and we don't show anything in the UI. So actually, if you want to update, you have to remove and re-enter. We don't bring them back out. Mm-hmm. So we assume everything is secure, but adding the security groups means that you can limit even the access.
And I can do it both from the UI and keep them around as encrypted in my CI, with my sources.
Correct. So let me run through here. So we've logged in for the question. We went and pulled the install dependencies for NPM, as we just talked about. Again, I'm now persisting the cache. This is so that I can run more quickly the next time. So I'm basically pulling files back in. CircleCI automatically holds between 10 and 50 gigs, depending on what you need, off to the side. And then I thought I was going to demo this. It turns out not to be all that useful. I just go in and poke one of the files just for fun, just to make some changes inside the React app. And then I ran some tests along with coverage. We didn't get to this piece. I'm sure we could have moved it, but within CircleCI, we're holding on to the test coverage information here so that we could, if we wanted, go look at it. And we can hold on to it with each build. I'm sure we could have pushed that as well. We just didn't get time to go do it. But this is an example of where we just had output from the build process, from the run, and we automatically can persist that for you and then show it to you as a time slice.
So this is actually just a folder that you figure out.
Yeah, so in this particular case, it's just I'll show you exactly what we did.
Test.
I went in and grabbed a single location and then all the contents within it and stored that locally as part of the build. And we could have pushed it to you instead.
And if you push it to Artifactory, you will just archive it with tar.gz.
Yep.
And you will have a tar.gz file that you will deploy into Artifactory. And another nice feature of Artifactory is that you will be able to see the site, the HTML site from the archive itself.
Just like
that.
Yep. You can go in and dig around and look at all the good stuff. Yeah. So, and then and by the way, we recognize a number of standard formats, so we can show test results as part of builds, which is what I was doing here.
Across different languages, JUnit results and all that for Java.
Yep. And then as we come down, we were going through and publishing the NPM package. We'll see that in a moment when we look inside the repository. Then we came through,
and again we use JFrog NPM publish instead
of
like the regular NPM publish, and that's again to capture the artifacts that we are actually publishing and record them into this bill of materials that is the building form.
And then you'll notice we also pass information about the repo name that came through, as well as the current build number, because we automatically increment that. And then we built the Docker file, right, which is now pointing to our unique location. And then finally, we push it. Now we do something unique here, which we'll get into in a moment. We go ahead and build the Docker file. We publish the Docker file or the container to the repository, and then we retag it as latest. So we use an ID, right? A build number ID, so you can identify it, uniquely. And then we go ahead and also float it on latest, which is not, latest isn't the only thing you should do. You should always be using an ID, but it's helpful to have that second float that sits on the top of what you're building.
Anyone was here when we did the meetup about Docker versions? No, so it is online and you can find it. And Ankush, one of our solution architects, actually explained and used this one of the tricks. So latest by itself is dangerous and useless because you don't really know what latest
What's
means.
there. Yeah.
And when we speak about traceability and repeatability, obviously having something that we don't really know what it refers to, it's problematic. From the other side, having latest is very, very useful. As you can see here in line 88, we can, in the same build, retrieve the latest that we just created, and we're pretty sure what it's there. It will be the latest build just because we are in the context of the build. Right, so we have a trade-off here between traceability and convenience. And what we do here with this retagging is we kind of achieve both of them. So we will see that we have the same image, both with the Docker version and latest. They refer to the same image, and then we can use them with the name for traceability and as latest for convenience.
And I think this is also another interesting point here, just really quickly, and we'll do that. What we've been going through, and I've been sort of throwing some words out just randomly, but let me give you a quick hierarchy. CircleCI thinks of 3 levels of execution. There's the build, then there's a workflow, and then there are jobs. Okay, so you have many jobs in a workflow, many workflows in a build. We happen to be walking through a single config file. The config describes the entire build. But in this particular case, the workflow actually does have 2 different jobs. Each job can run independently, or they can run with dependencies between them. And this is incredibly simple. In most cases, it gets very complicated. But one of the things that's interesting here with this test-in container is where there's a dependency and it's picking up the prior job. So this is a leaf node, the prior job's constructed container, and then it executes within the container that was constructed, drawing it back down from the repository. So that it's I don't know that there's a reason you would do this necessarily, but it's a demonstration of how we think it's very flexible in terms of where you run and how you manipulate your different
and where is the cut between the jobs? How can we know that those are two different jobs?
So it's a little bit inobvious here because we're using YAML. This is part of YAML syntax, but you can see up at the top, there's jobs, and then you can see here build. And if I go down here, I can see test. If I'm in an IDE, it's a little more obvious typically, right? I can do things like collapse those particular elements and see that these are in fact at the same level, and therefore
just not actually indentation.
Right, exactly. There's jobs and there's build and there's tests, right? So it's good and bad to YAML. It's very dry, which we like, right? It's very clear what's happening because we spell everything out in detail. It's one of the changes we made over the past year. The prior older versions of CircleCI had something called inference, which on the one hand was very useful to get spun up quickly, but then you wound up fighting it because it was trying to do things under the covers and it wasn't obvious what was happening. So we actually have moved away from that. And if you have noticed, we just came out with a public preview of something we call orbs, which is a way to encapsulate your config. So you can get back to one-liners, like one-line commands, but then they expand out into a whole body of config. Wasn't what we came here to talk about, but
that config will be like a separate file.
It's a separate file that can be shared across projects, can be shared across repos as you choose. It's basically like an import. So it's not really what we came here to talk about, but it's something that you can go look at our public preview that we're doing, and that's something you'll be hearing a lot about over the next few months. Do you want to drop into the other side and show some of the output?
Right. So as you can see here, and I think the command here that is interesting, we use the short versions of command. Maybe that was a mistake because it's kind of unclear what it does. BB stands for build info publish. And this is where we upload all the information that we collected previously to Artifactory together with the artifacts, right? So we just did Docker publish 2 lines before right here. That's where we publish our Docker artifact, and then we collect the environment variables because there will be useful information in there, and then we publish all the build information into Artifactory as well. And if you see, here in the output, and it will be the published Docker file right here, you can see here that it says build info successfully deployed, and it actually gives us an artifact, it gives us a URL. It goes to Artifactory. If I'm going to copy paste it, it will bring us into the build browser of Artifactory, and it will show this metadata that we spoke about, right? So you can see here the general info. Obviously, it was built in CircleCI. You can see here, you can see the user that deployed, that was met, and of course, the URL back to CircleCI. And that's kind of the bidirectional link between your artifacts and your CI server, right? The publish modules, this is the information that we collected here. And you can see here 2 modules because if you remember, we have 2 jobs and they correspond to it. The names are the names of the artifacts that were deployed. That was the first one, and that's the NPM. So you can see here that we deployed 1 artifact, and that's our calculator. That's exactly the product that we created, and that will be the information about this one we gathered from this line in configuration. That was the JFrog npm install, right? So here we installed the artifact that we created, but also recorded it in the build info. So you can see here, that it was recorded, and all the dependencies as the result of npm. The other way around. That's the dependencies are the install, and the artifact is the publish. So all the results of the install are all recorded. They all went through our command line client and recorded everything that happened. So we actually know about all the dependencies, and the publish, we recorded the artifact as well. Going back to the Agile model. This is the result of our work with the JFrog CLI for Docker. So you can see here, we didn't have any dependencies because we created a new image, but we did record the manifest and all the layers that we created and actually deployed to Artifactory. And if we are going to look at this Docker image, so here it is, that's the 84, and you can see all the layers of Docker registered right here. It's actually exactly the same layers that we saw as artifacts which were created in build info. You can see here and actually see that, yeah, it runs npm, and copy, that's the command that copied our artifact that we created before we published it into Docker image. And you can see here our game with the latest. So if I go to manifest and I will copy the SHA-2, and then I will search for it in the checksum search, you'll actually see that I have two images with exactly same checksum. And that will be the number 84, but also the latest. It's actually the same image that we copied in order to create this symlink for the convenience of using latest. And of course, the copy is free because Artifactory is checksum based. So no files were actually duplicated in the process. And it's kind of important when we're talking about Docker images, which are pretty big. And from here, we can go back to our builds as well. So you can see here the build that created this Docker image. Again, you can go to the build result from here, and we are actually going back to the same screen of the build 84, and you can dive into those into this build. The other stuff here is, for example, what is very useful is the list of environment variables. You remember the JFrog collect environment variables. This is what it did. Recorded all the environment variables that we have. And of course, we can compare builds and ask what is the difference between this one and build number 76. So it will tell us, we'll compare all the artifacts. Some artifacts are new, right? Because something changed. Some artifacts are the same because we actually generated the same Docker image. And the dependencies, well, none of the dependencies changed, which actually makes sense. A lot of environment variable changed, but that's all the CircleCI environments that change with every build.
We were also changing the container that we were running inside of.
Right.
We were looking to bring the right set of elements together.
And
so
I think it might be here, right? It might be somewhere in those environment variables, right? What it is, machine, maybe Docker machine name,
yep,
right? That's, yep. Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about containers. This concept of jobs running in an environment is one that it's at our core. It's not just containers. We also run machine executors, including Mac OS. Mm-hmm. And so the workflow, you can move seamlessly back and forth between them. A use case we see quite a lot in cloud is that people will start with Linux builds, and then they'll have a job running on Mac OS in order to build an iOS app of some sort or a TV app, and then come back to Linux and do a deploy. So you see things moving very dynamically back and forth between, and we also see quite a lot of folks pushing items up to Artifactory and then pulling back down as part of that process for deploy. So we didn't really walk into the deploy, but I think you can see how the deploy story would work very seamlessly. It's the same basic process you would have seen here, interacting with the command line, and then of course triggering it through the JFrog tools. Question?
Yeah. Do you have an example where you can track the commit ID? Or,
yeah, it's actually right here. It's in the environment variables. So you can see both from CircleCI side and in Artifactory side as well, right? So in the environment variables here, what will be the commit ID?
Keep going down. We should have the SHA in here.
The second page, I guess.
Yeah, the SHA should be in here somewhere. So we do collect the VCS SHA as well as What's that?
It's on the previous.
Oh,
did
you
I
saw
just
it?
miss it?
Yeah, we just missed it. Okay, it's good to have you here.
SHA-1.
Yep, there it is.
Yep.
Then to the bottom. So, but we have a variety of environment variables that just automatically populate based on the execution. And then you use environment and context to layer in more if you want to do so.
Just want to go back to that topic of
Yeah.
tagging latest.
Yeah.
You mentioned that. I mean, that can't possibly work. It's a race condition.
You're right. So it wouldn't be a good idea in general, but because we're able to sequence,
Same time, I mean, two builds at the same time.
they're not running at the same time.
I mean,
So
two
workflows.
users are using the build.
Correct. I wouldn't suggest this is kind of the point of latest is a dangerous thing to use.
Yeah, okay.
But within a single build, we are in a controlled environment. We know we're the only ones posting here, and we know our workflow has a dependency identified. We can be reasonably sure in that environment that it gets created here and gets used there. But certainly, if you're running in a production environment with thousands of developers hitting at the same time or hundreds hitting the same repo, I wouldn't make that kind of guarantee. You can, through CircleCI, have a configuration that automatically cancels prior. And so it only takes the latest, use a different term here, only takes the most recent update. And so you can, through that, sort of battle the recency issue.
You should be more smart about timing it. Put a git shot.
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, the build number is unique because
actually we did that.
It generated UUID. Yeah, here you go.
So this is the whole debate within CircleCI is whether UUIDs should be the rule everything or whether or not we should use sequential digits. We of course offer both, and it's up to you to use whichever you choose. And from but there's value to both.
Yeah, and from our perspective, it's also absolutely orthogonal because both the build name and the build number are just free text strings. So something like that definitely works. Or you
just hard to read.
Or you can do a build number and then a charge for example, a timestamp when the build started.
This actually might be an example where you would use the same publish like we did to latest, but actually you might do the ID, the SHA ID, the UID, and then on top of it do a duplicate, which is the actual human readable build number, and know that they're correlated.
We can actually have 3 different identifiers refer to the same Docker image.
If that's helpful.
Readable build ID, the UUID, and the latest in case. So there are a lot of options.
A lot of options.
There was something else that I wanted to mention. So Matt, you mentioned that you can add environment variables that then will be part of the build results. You can also add additional properties to the build itself, and it will show in the build info, and to each and every artifact that you produce. So if you want, for example, to tag each and every artifact with additional metadata, such as the version control commit, you can easily do that. And every artifact that will be uploaded to Artifactory on top of the, I would say, implicit metadata that comes with an artifact of a special type, just because it has this type, it will have custom properties that you can add from your build, and those properties will come from the environment in CircleCI. So you can add here any number of custom properties from there.
And then automatically populate through.
Yeah. And you can use obviously the environment variables. They will automatically be translated to the real value.
Now this was a bit of a thin demo in that we just created it. But if on a production environment, we also provide insights that show build timings, build results, and queue times. So you can keep track of all that and see it as a time slice. If I were to look here, there'd be like 1 bar because we just built this, but yeah.
So we use Jenkins, and one thing I have not seen, or at least I don't know how to do in CI tooling, CircleCI does it. It's this concept. You have your product here, I think it's called,
CircleCI
calculator, your calculator.
The calculator.
Sure. The repo is CircleCI demo JFrog.
But the product is your calculator, right? The calculated product, whatever semantic version that it's at, has to match your CircleCI your project year. For example, a year from now, the build for calculator might change for whatever reason.
Of course.
Right? So how does CircleCI handle version control of the project file?
Oh, well,
And
so the config is in your VCS.
I agree. Oh.
So that's version controlled by its very nature. So in fact, the way we worked is I was working in an IDE, and then I did a commit and a push to GitHub. And then CircleCI would recognize that change in GitHub, pull the config file, introspect it, and say, this is the execution you want me to perform. And then it goes through and performs the job path. So I can go reproduce a build from a year ago with the config of a year ago.
Because it's packaged with
with the product, with the code itself. So we put the config in the repo. We believe very strongly, dry, the config as code, all these are really strong tenets for us.
And you know what I would do both for additional layer of persistence metadata, but also for the convenience of just things in one place? I would go to my calculator, I would configure CircleCI when we do this npm publish of the product, and make sure that the artifact here have in the properties references to the container that was created in terms of the image name and the tag, and the container that was used in the build time by, again, having its build image name and tag, because it is actually right here. So you can actually navigate directly from here to the container that was your CI environment. More so, I can add this information to my build info to be a dependency. So when I will look back here in my build info, I will have here a new module that it will be called my build image, and it will contain a reference to the Docker image right here in Artifactory that was used as my build image. And then you have full transparency and full repeatability in any point of time, because all you will need to know is run CircleCI with this image and with this config from your source control, and you will get the exactly same build.
And it's that right there.
Yeah.
That image right there is the one thing we just didn't get to when we were just putting this together.
And we can proxy it. It comes from bin tray, and you can proxy it in Artifactory and have it in Artifactory and reference it as another module in your build info. That's really, really cool. I'm so excited about this concept that your CI agent is just another build image as everything else, and you manage it as other Docker images. It's really cool.
And just to show you quickly, so this is obviously GitHub, and within the CircleCI, this is the actual configuration file we were just looking at.
Yeah,
exactly. It's all in the VCS.
And you have the commits of this one as a metadata of the artifacts as well.
Yes, embarrassingly, you can see me messing around with fixing errors.
Follow-up question to this is, how do you handle GitHub pull requests? Like, say I want to do a pull request on the DevOps part, so on this script right here.
Yeah, we have quite a lot of flexibility there. So you have all sorts of options. We can do builds on PRs, or you can do a PR-only build if you want to flip it around and say, no, I only want to build when there's a PR. So you have quite a lot of flexibility on how you want to manage that. Also, I was using, just for simplicity, I was using a free account. So there's a lot more capability with the paid accounts. And you also have more control over some of those, especially with open source and whatnot as well. You have control over contributors and how people cause builds and how they're managed.
And every PR can cause an automatic build with a feedback back to GitHub PR on the status of this build. Exactly. Did it break?
But it's a choice. It's a choice you make when you're configuring it, how you want to structure it, whether it's PR based or PR exclusive, etc. Yeah. Okay.
Can you just detect pull requests to certain branches?
Yep, you can put in a filter. We call them filters. And so in your config, you can identify a filter so that you can actually even have portions of your config that are dedicated to particular filters or particular portions of your branch. And that's very helpful for monorepos, as an example.
So I don't have questions for in
Yeah.
Docker repo, we keep producing container,
Yes.
and out of 100, maybe 2 are released or last one.
Uh-huh.
How do we get rid of 99?
Yeah, so
Can I just real quick, can I add one thing real quickly?
Yep.
So actually very similar to the filter. We chose to always generate a container, but as part of your workflow, you can put logic in to determine whether or not your build test, for example, your test output or your coverage levels or whatever other properties you want to look at actually met the requirements to create a container. Once you create a container, then yes, you do have this issue when it comes across.
Yes, and you can take different strategies here. What we didn't get into at all, just because of the limits of our demo, is the promotion part. So this build doesn't have any release history, and it means that we generated the container, threw it in the Artifactory, generated an image, threw it in the Artifactory, and didn't do anything else. Now, what we could do is setting up a cascading set of repositories in Artifactory and then promote this build through those repositories by using JFrog REST API just for when it passes the quality gates. So we can test it for performance, for stress testing, for security, and every time it passes or won't pass as a quality gate, we will promote it, and it will be listed here. And I can show you an example of another demo. This one, each build here actually does have a release history, and you can see here the first one, this build. So what I did here is I run tests without a container, even on pure Java. And only if those tests passed, I decided to create a Docker image for it. That will be first step in my promotion. And next, that will be a result automatically tested on all target platforms. That will be my next step. Yeah. And then when we have those other repositories that the images there are not that important, you can set up clean that will automatically delete the images from there based on your logic. You can keep latest by time. You can keep latest by numbers. So you can say, I only want to have 3 tags in this repository. When you deploy a new one, the oldest one, the 4th, will be automatically deleted.
So next time we go through this, we can go and add that as
exactly.
So
there it is. Right.
Does all that move to the release?
Yes. So when you do this promotion, you can select whether you want to promote the dependencies or not. If you select to promote the dependencies, all the dependencies will be moved or copied, up to you, from one repository to another in Artifactory.
What is the best place to store all the dependencies?
Artifactory is, when you ask where is the best place to store, the answer is always the same.
The bill of material. Okay, this might be something.
Yeah. So again, we record it in exactly the same way. So we record it as dependencies. Those dependencies that we have here don't have to be external, come from NPM registry only. They can very well be your internal dependencies, and you record them using JFrog CLI. Then you can say, okay, this file that I just downloaded from Artifactory, that's another microservice of another team, it's also a dependency of mine.
You could imagine, going a little further, you can imagine having a Helm chart that's in a VC, that's in a repo somewhere, and that when you need to, you update the Helm chart, right? Kicks off a build, reaches out and interacts with the repository to then promote appropriately the right containers. And then it's not precisely the same question that you're answering, but it's, I mean, these days with microservices, the known good set problem is a real issue. And I think that's, you're kind of leading towards that, which is we're no longer a linear, we're now a graph in terms of microservices. And so understanding the containers and the container relationships. Oh, I got it.
Okay. Yeah, so what I wanted to show.
That would be a good way to do it.
And going back to your question, JFrog works as the Helm repository as well.
Yep.
And it's exactly the same it's exactly the same concept. But regardless of the technology that you work with, and we saw an example of NPM and its dependencies, it works the same with Java and its dependencies, and it works the same with Docker and its dependencies when you actually use Helm. So the build info of a Helm build will have artifacts, which will be Docker images, and dependencies, which will be other Docker images, and that will be other microservices that you use. It's exactly the same idea.
Isn't APT supposed to be listed there?
Which one?
apt-get?
apt-get.
It's APT is Debian. Here you go. Top line in the middle. Yes.
Can you go into a bit more detail about using filters in a mono repo? Is it just for deployment, or can you like switch on different steps, or like use cached steps? Or?
So it has. So we actually don't, especially in the 2.0 world, we don't uniquely separate deployment from anything else. It's just running jobs. So you can just use your filters as you choose to encapsulate whatever logic you want to execute based on that particular filter. We do recognize that there's more to go for mono repos, and we're continuing to invest there. But the filter concept you can use wherever you need to, and can allow it. It's not just deploy based, and so you can do it today. I think it creates a bit of a bulky config, and as a head of product, I'm not happy with the size of the config, which is one of the reasons we're coming forward with orbs, which allows you to pull things out and share them, and that'll make it easier to read without losing the dry aspects.
You can encapsulate, for example, the configuration of the filter.
You could encapsulate, well, one example would be you would encapsulate a particular sub-element in a monorepo. So a particular project within the larger monorepo, you might encapsulate that into an orb. And then within the top line config, you'd have a filter that identifies which orb to use for that particular project. And that's what we're building right now. But even without that, you can still have it in your config today. It's just very long, the bit verbose.
Your YAML file that you
Yes.
Is it Jinja enabled? Did I enter one conditionals for loops of state?
Yes.
Is it Jinja?
So I believe so. We can verify afterwards, but my understanding is yes.
Well, like a monorepo setup, are you saying that you would have a config in each of the sub projects?
Today you'd have a single config, and I'm not happy with that, but it works, and we have a lot of customers doing it. It makes for very large config files, and what we're building right now, like I said, we just went public preview with orbs, is a mechanism that will allow you to start collapsing that and manage it much more easily.
And then so you would just put a sub run step.
You actually would take the vast majority of what we're looking at here today and put it into the orb, and the top line here would essentially just be a series of references.
So you basically import parts of your.
It would be a map. Essentially, your top config would be a bit of a mapping file.
So you just want one
would be like
service
this project, that orb, this project, that orb, and then within the orb, you could expand out to other ones. So that's the.
And the orb will take care of this particular part of the monorepo, this microservice, basically.
Yeah, and I'm happy to talk more about this offline here because it's, like I said, something that's in development right now, and so I'd love to get your feedback as well. But as I said, we have lots of folks using monorepos with the config. They're just long.
Are orbs public preview right now?
Yeah. No, it's public preview. So there's a description of orbs currently, and you go with the SDK. All right.
Any other questions?
Other questions of things you have wondered about in switching from Jenkins to a SaaS-based? Yeah?
Yeah.
There's a lot to think about there.
Well, Jenkins made some moves towards configuration as code, but
it's a different way of thinking, right? They're just different value propositions.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No, for I would say like 4 years.